Hello and welcome back to Crushing Comics, the web series where I fall in love with my comic collection all over again. We're going to choose one of my bundles of comics from the walls. They're not actual comics, they are collected editions, primarily oversized collected editions, primarily Marvel Omnibuses that collect a big lump of comics all into one place. You know, do you remember when you first got into comics? Do you remember the first comic you ever looked at on the shelf or in your hands? It's funny because I have like sort of two different pieces of memory. I had those comics that kind of just sat around the house when I was a kid, probably because somebody thought it was a good idea to buy them for me off of the spinner rack, because we were like in some drugstore waiting in line for something, and comics only used to cost like 50 cents. I remember I had an issue of Peter Porker Spider-Ham that was very precious to me. I had a couple of issues of Captain America. I had an old Conan comic book that I think was probably my dad's because he likes that kind of stuff. And that was really it, and I didn't really understand the allure of comics. I understood that things like the Super Friends and Marvel's Secret Wars toys were from comic books. And I loved the characters, but there was really no mechanism for like a little kid to get into comic books at that point. They were just written as if they were for people of any age, whether that was, 8 or 9 up to people in their, adulthood. And, but there wasn't a really entry-level place for a 6-year-old to get in comic books the way that there is now. So if you were a 6-year-old who had those Secret Wars toys in 1985 or 86, and you picked up a Captain America toy, the Captain America comic was quite complex at that point. It's not to say a 6-year-old couldn't appreciate it, but it was definitely not aimed at a 6-year-old. And the majority of Marvel's content was such of that nature. Really, Power Pack is the only one I can think of that, like, at all was aimed at that time towards really a younger crowd. And Power Pack was actually a well-made comic book most people don't realize. Of course, now there are, like, Marvel Adventures series, there's web-only series. DC has things like DC Superhero Girls, which exist in their own separate continuity, just so little kids can get into them, and my daughter is obsessed with those. And then Marvel actually just has mainstream, main universe Marvel comic books that are written for younger kids and appropriate for younger kids. Unstoppable Wasp was one like that. It was really fun. It was about a young girl who was really into STEM and wanted to get STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, and wanted to get other young female heroes that were interested into it together. And it's written in this very glib way that a lot of adults wrote off. But I thought it was great because it was written in a way that really would resonate with kids, and maybe it wasn't for the adult comic books. Oh wow! Okay, so segue. In the same way I was just talking about the first comics I ever had in my house, this was my first Marvel Omnibus. You can't plan this stuff. Well, I mean, you could plan this stuff, but then I would know it was in these packages, and I swear I have no idea. I mean, sometimes by the weight, but anyway. This is Wolverine. Yeah, look at this honker. That is a big freaking omnibus. This is, Marvel needs to get on reprinting this because this is like essential as hell. It is super ultra essential. What this is we could almost call it like the Wolverine companion in the way that it starts, because it has everything you would want of Wolverine to run alongside what he was doing in Uncanny X-Men. So it has the weapon, the famous Weapon X sequence by Barry Windsor Smith from Marvel Comic Books Presents, which introduces us to how Wolverine got the adamantium in his system. It then, from there, directly jumps to Wolverine's debut in Hulk, which is collected with X-Men comics in X-Men Marvel Masterworks number 8, which doesn't actually have any X-Men issues in it. It just has various appearances of other X-Men, including Wolverine, who was not even an X-Men at that point, but would be shortly thereafter. Then this jumps to... Let's see. Then this jumps to the Wolverine, Chris Claremont and Frank Miller series, which is actually now also collected with the X-Men Omnibus, but they had no way of knowing we were going to get to that point this time. It has some brief Uncanny X-Men issues that help to bookend that. It has the Kitty Pryde and Wolverine series, Wolverine appearing in Captain America, Spider-Man and Wolverine's one-shot, Wolverine's classic appearance, and the Hulk there. Gosh, it just keeps going. So, actually, no, it doesn't keep going. So then it stops adding sort of supplemental Wolverine, and it starts going with chronological Wolverine as he started to get more of his ongoing solo work. So he, effectively, Marvel Comics Presents, which was launched in 1988, was like a Wolverine feature book that happened to have 3 other features in it. There was almost no issues of Marvel Comics Presents for a long time that didn't have a Wolverine story in them. And Wolverine was in the opening arc, which was based in Madripoor, and that's all here. And then this also has the first 10 issues of his series, as well as 2 issues that he was in Punisher War Journal. So this is, at the time that I bought this, which would have been in probably early 2011, this was a no-brainer because it contained so much early Wolverine that you would have had to buy a ton of other books to put it together. You would have to buy the Weapon X book, Marvel Premiere hardcover of X Wolverine and Kitty Pryde, Claremont Miller Wolverine, and it was all here along with some of those kind of individual issues like that great Incredible Hulk issue, which I think is a McFarlane cover, that you weren't going to be able to put together otherwise. Now, what's interesting about this is I think if Marvel had done this now, they probably would not have pushed into Wolverine's, yes, that is Todd McFarlane on Incredible Hulk 340. If Marvel did this now, they probably would not push into Wolverine's ongoing series. Marvel has really gotten more into the idea of these self-contained books that can be kind of like the early years or like before the something. So they just put out like a Punisher book that's very similar to this that goes right up to before his ongoing series starts. So this was kind of like an odd duckling, and people really want a volume 2, but it's like volume 2 is just going to randomly start on Wolverine issue 11 when this book had 1 to 10. So you have to wonder, like, would Marvel go back to press with this book? It would be much smaller if they printed it again because it wouldn't have this beautiful thick paper that the old Marvel Omnibuses had. But then have to sell through that print run just to put out a volume 2? Would they just restart Wolverine volume 1 that just collected his series and repeated the 10 issues from this, which is the method that his Epic collection takes? Or would it do something else, right? Maybe, and this is something I would love, they would thread together all of the major Wolverine appearances from the period that is subsequent to this one, which would not only include his ongoing series and Marvel Comics Presents, but a number of original graphic novels and one-shots that Wolverine was in at the time, which kind of acted in place of annuals, because he didn't have annuals at first. Marvel is somewhat taking that tact in the Wolverine Epics collections, but it seems like they might wind up leaving a few aside, and me being the completist that I am, like, I just want it all woven in as much continuity order as makes sense. Clearly, if one story just does not go with the other ones, even if it happened in between 2 issues nominally, you don't have to put that in. But I would just subscribe to Marvel being like, here's everything in order, which for the most part the Epic collections are. The only time that breaks down is when you get a character who appears in so many other places in their own series, which Wolverine does, and which is also the case for Spider-Man, because the Spider-Man Epics are only collecting Amazing Spider-Man and then Web of and Spectacular if they cross over directly. I would have preferred that the Spider-Man Epics just collected every Spider-Man ongoing title and sorted them into order, but I'm not working at the Marvel Collections department at this point in my life. So this was my first omnibus, and I remember buying it and thinking, really? Because look at this thing. I could clock somebody with this. And at the time, I didn't have any oversized books. I was only buying trade paperbacks. And I was like, do I have to dip into this oversized nonsense to get this material? But I did. And I'm happy that I did, because this book is real darn hard to find now. Plus, it's great. I've read a lot of this material. It's, despite being a heavy weight on your chest if you're in bed reading it, like, oh my goodness, it's good stuff. So I'm very happy to have it, and very happy to have unwrapped my first Marvel Omnibus Wolverine. So, on to ceremonial shelving. I think we're going to put it after Uncanny X-Men 3. For now. Of course, there's going to be some future point when I have to reorganize this. In fact, I'm kind of like reorganizing it in between every video to just make sure everything fits. But tune in next time and you can see me open another pack of books. Maybe I'll have psychic powers next time too and start talking about something relevant to the book, or maybe it will totally blindside me, as we saw in some past episodes where I barely knew what I was talking about. You won't know until you tune in, so please come back to Crushing Comics.